Hello and welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. My name is Ben and with me as always is...
Captain Mal Reynolds.
And he is a leaf on the wind.
Wash is the leaf on the wind, but...
You're my leaf on the wind.
My name is Jim, and this week we watched my film of choice for this week, which was Serenity from 2005. So, do you want me to deliver a succinct and beautiful synopsis of this cinematic delight?
Do it, because I've got plenty to talk about.
So in Serenity from 2005, Captain Mal Reynolds and his crew of the spaceship Serenity are on the run after rescuing River Tam, a psychic fugitive experimented on by the mysterious Alliance. Pursued by a relentless assassin known only as the Operative, they uncover that River's visions reveal a dark secret. The Alliance created the Reavers, which were cannibalistic marauders, through a failed experiment on a planet called Miranda. Determined to expose the truth, Mal broadcasts the evidence, shattering the Alliance's credibility, and in a final battle, most of the crew barely survives, and though their ship is damaged, they escape, continuing their journey through the verse.
I have one very important thing to say before I get onto the facts, and that the Operative, Chiwetel Ejiofor, may be the coolest person ever in film.
Yeah, he's pretty rad.
He's like the coolest. Anyway, we'll get to that. As Jim said, Serenity, released 2005, directed by Joss Whedon, Avengers, Age of Ultron, Much Ado About Nothing, and the Justice League.
That's
kinda.
That's just not nice.
Written by Joss Whedon, Toy Story, Titan AE, Alien Resurrection.
You had fun with this, didn't you?
I did have a little bit of fun. Based on the TV series Firefly by Joss Whedon. Starring Nathan Fillion, Alan Tudyk, Adam Baldwin, and Summer Glau, and Chiwetel Ejiofor. Now, criminally, that's where Wikipedia stops with the cast. But I'm going to continue with Sean Mayer, Jules Strait, Marina Baccarin, and Gina Torres. They miss half the crew off the cast list, which is insane. Budget of $39 million, box office of $40 million. And them's the facts. Now, I think it's really important we start this podcast with explaining how this movie became a thing. Because there may be people who have no idea.
Well, I'm not sure if you ever watched Firefly, which
multiple times back to front.
Yeah, right. So Joss Whedon was someone who was I guess a super producer at the time on television, and he's obviously famous for creating Buffy, and then its sister show or spin-off, if you like, called Angel. And he was working for Fox, and Fox wanted a third show from him. So he created a show called Firefly, which is this exact cast, this exact design language, basically everything that you see in the final film Serenity, he had already done on TV in one season that only went for a half season because then it was cancelled. But of course, this was the little show that could. So we're now in 2002. And we are seeing that even though this show got cancelled midway through its first season, it exploded on DVD, has to this day, dedicated legion of loyal fans, of which I think you and I are both counted among that number. And so with that being the case, even though the show was gone and finished, Whedon started shopping the idea as a movie based again on the known fan base and the strong DVD sales. And even though it was a Fox show, Universal actually came in and greenlit the film version. So fast forward to 2005 and Serenity comes out, which I think is really, all of that is very important when you look at both the strengths and, shall we say, yes, the weaknesses of the finished product. But what do you think, Ben? Did I miss anything out in that little trip down memory lane?
I'll just say that what very much happened to this show as well, that happened a lot of shows in this time period, when networks aren't confident about a show, or even like just one person at a network has got a show, it basically becomes the role of filling gaps. So it keeps getting moved to time slots, days, and things like that. And that definitely happened to Firefly as well. So there was this thing where maybe I think it was the first 2 or 3 episodes aired. It then got shifted days. There was like a 3-week gap. Like it was one of those shows that got murdered by the network. And it had a lot of trouble. Like, even like, I think it's a great show, but even the best show in the world would have trouble finding an audience
Yeah.
with that method of delivery. It's not like this current age where shows can kind of be dropped all at once and be allowed to find their audience. It just didn't have that opportunity to breathe. So you're right, the DVD part of this was really, really important, especially for places outside of the US, Australia, the UK, Europe, those places. That's the only place you could find it. Like, for example, the reason I found this show was because of a mutual friend of ours. I know he listens to the podcast. Let's call him Beeve. And he introduced me to the show because him and his brother were obsessed with it. And then I found out you were watching it as well. And it was just one of these kind of things that we organically found it because of that. And then the movie came out shortly after I found the show, and I'm just like, this is amazing. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that bit to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's certainly going to inform part of our sort of discussion. But like, even all that said, and the fact that big Firefly fan, watched it, a lot. I've seen this sort of single half season and an awful lot, and I've seen this movie a lot. And then what I realized when I was watching it for this podcast is I haven't seen it recently. And
Yeah.
it was actually really fun to come back and look at it kind of with fresh eyes, if you like. So, it's one of those things where it does this double duty of introducing an audience to this world and these characters while also closing this world and these characters for people who watched the TV show version. And that means that it is a little bit of a magic trick if it works on either of those two levels. So, and it's certainly got things that are a little bit inconsistent because it is performing that dual duty, if you like. So,
Mm-hmm.
so let's talk a little bit though about the movie itself. I think that the world that they have built with the Firefly Serenity world is outstanding, and it's highly unique as well. And it's a huge draw card of the entire universe, if you like. This fictional place that we could go, which is like a frontiers world, but it's definitely also very much set in space in the future. So I think the world's a massive draw.
It adopts one of my favorite tropes in sci-fi that you really don't see enough because it's kind of hard to do, and that's multicultural sci-fi. So the whole idea that if the human race continues and we go out into the stars, not everyone is going to speak English, not everyone is going to do these things, and you're going to have this hybrid language, you're going to have these hybrid cultures. And that's what this show kind of does as part of its world without even trying to explain itself. It just is. And so, I mean, for example, like the most spoken language in the world is like Mandarin or Chinese, right? And you get that kind of reflected in this future where things like advertising and swear words and all these sort of things are kind of adapted into the culture as part of their everyday life. And then you kind of get this kind of rusty frontiers sci-fi mixed with that, with Western attitudes, like Western as in like Western film genre, like cowboys. And you get this really unique flavor. You get this kind of this level of kind of mixing pot that is both familiar and foreign and really fun to just observe. Like, if you could kind of just exist in this world in a VR experience and walk around it, it'd be one of the most fun things ever, in my opinion. As far as like quality sci-fi, like good sci-fi storytelling tells a story around its story with its world. And I think this is one of the things that both Firefly and Serenity achieve very, very well.
Absolutely, and it's the story, it's the world, and of course, it's the characters inhabiting that world. And Joss Whedon, particularly in his television days, before he was directing Avengers, and yes,
Controversy.
controversy and all of that sort of thing. But in his television days, he was really renowned for his dialogue and for his character work. And there's a actual phenomenon in one of his other shows called Buffy Speak, and it's because the characters speak with such a specific intonation that is specific to that world and that universe, and it's not the way people speak in the real world. A little bit like Aaron Sorkin as well, who has a very specific cadence to the words that he writes down on the page for the actors then to speak. And then, of course, there's a different version of Joss Whedon's flavor of Buffy speak, if you like, in the Firefly universe or the Serenity universe.
I was talking about this to somebody at work, and the example I gave was Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
Like it has its vernacular and its cadence and its kind of language is very specific to its show and its creator. And yeah, I was like, oh, you watch Gilmore Girls? Think like uniqueness like that.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that, of course, is something that actually probably works a lot better in the TV show because the audience has longer to absorb the unique nature of what people are saying. And even because it had been a while since I have seen Serenity or even watched the show, even though I'm very familiar with it, it took me half a second to be like, that's right. They use words that aren't our words. They're made up words, which that they use to actually, populate the world and make it seem more specific. But one thing I do want to talk about as well before, because we're going to dive into the characters. We're going to. I'm kind of saving it, because there's a few other things that I want to talk about. This movie is really...
They're the meat and potatoes.
Exactly. But there's a couple of other little things that I just want to sort of, talk around before we get to these wonderful characters from this film. And one of them is this movie begins with a quadruple fake out. And I was just like... I have to just mention this on the podcast because it's insane. Like the film, first of all, last week you were talking about how much you love a good logo transition or logo reveal. So it has one of those, right? Where we move from the Universal logo into our spaceships leaving Earth and into voiceover narration. And it seems like normal voiceover narration, setting up the world and establishing things. And then we transition out of that and realize that the voiceover narration is that of a teacher who is teaching her class about the history of mankind in the universe. And you go, okay, cool. We've transitioned from one to the
Alliance
other.
history.
Alliance history, yes. So we've had one opening, which is the narration, and then we've transitioned into opening 2, which is the classroom. And then we transition again and realize that this classroom is actually a flashback to a character who is being psychologically tortured, which is now opening 3. And then after that sequence plays out for a little while, we then transition back out again to opening 4 and realize it was security video footage of someone watching the person getting psychologically tortured. And I'm just like, that shouldn't work. If we really think about it in terms of, screenwriting do's and don'ts, none of that should work. But it does. And this is all pre-title card of the movie. And of course, what it's doing is catching us up on half a season's worth of storytelling that the audience may not have seen. And it's trying to do it in an interesting way so that we get out of the voiceover narration portion as quickly as possible and into some more sort of meaty kind of storytelling and action-based storytelling and show don't tell in order to get this story out. And I just think it's a really classy opening. It's a really complicated opening, and it's a really good opening that, like I said, sometimes there are things that should not work. And if you were to look at any kind of screenwriting book, they'd be like, yeah, don't do that. That's crazy, you know? And then sometimes breaking that rule, if you are talented, can actually work very, very well.
Before we get too far away from it, I think that also speaks to what you were speaking about before, is this is a movie for two audiences. It's a movie for people who have no idea about the TV show, and it's a movie for people who want to see a conclusion to the TV show. And that is an artifact. This opening is an artifact of that. You're right. This movie has to get moving very, very fast. It has to get into its plot outside of the TV show's plot as fast as it can. And this opening does so many things to do that. It introduces you to the technology and the sci-fi of this world through the holograms and the way they view the videos. It introduces you to kind of the authoritarian background government. It introduces you to one of our main characters and her abilities. It introduces you to all these mysteries that kind of got introduced and partially explained in the TV show, to a point where you can kind of start to finish those explanations in a way that is satisfactory.
As well as the introduction to the antagonist
Yes.
of the film, who is an introduction for him as well, because we've never met him
He's
before,
a new character.
Mm.
Quick question, though, before we keep diving in. We talk about how it's for two different audiences. What audience do you think this movie serves better? Do you think it serves our new audience, or do you think it serves our existing audience? I have an opinion.
Yeah, right. I actually really struggle because I began my journey with this universe as the audience who was being introduced to it for the first time. At the time, in 2005, I had no knowledge that there was a television show. I didn't know that there was a TV show called Firefly. I just watched this as someone who liked science fiction, and I went to the cinemas and I saw the movie. And I remember thinking, that was fun. It's kind of big. There was a lot of characters in it, and I was sort of going to myself, it seemed almost kind of overstuffed. And of course, that makes sense when you actually look at everything it's trying to do. But I really enjoyed it. It was just something that I wasn't quite like ride or die for this story world at that point in time. And it was probably 12 months later that I was introduced to Firefly, and then I did the reverse journey where I watched the whole show and then watched the movie, and I was like, oh, this is a completely different experience now. So having been in both camps, I think it ultimately, it might actually work better as the introduction, and that might seem crazy, but I have there's some stuff there on why it's actually a little bit problematic for the audience of the TV show who watched the TV show first. But look, what are your thoughts on the matter?
I also think it's better as an introduction, and mainly because it was never going to be able to tie up and satisfy every loose thread. So if you came into this movie as a fan of the show, wanting to see all the things answered, all the things resolved, all the character things done, it's just never going to happen. There's not enough time in a single movie. Whereas if you come to this first, watch it, and then you go back and you watch the TV show expands it and fills in the gaps and kind of works to kind of build up the world around the movie and the characters, and you don't get dissatisfied because it's all the stuff that's not in the movie is new to you. And I think it kind of works a little bit better that way, even though they were created the opposite way around. And I think that's not a slight on what it did for fans. I think it did a lot of good things for fans. I just think it's slightly better the other way.
It's the one thing that I will talk about there is that when you've watched the show, what they actually, I think, had to do, so I don't blame writer-director for this thing, is that they actually had to regress the characters from where we saw them end the TV show. So Mal, the captain, is a lot darker in Serenity because he has to have an arc and he has to actually, go somewhere. And he has to, develop, I guess, the real sort of love for his crewmates by the end of the film. While he's fond of them at the start, he's a lot flintier towards them than he is by the end of the TV show. He's kind of regressed a little bit character-wise so that they can build him back up and give him more of an arc, Same with the character of Jane, who has also regressed a little bit into sort of a more primitive side after learning a lot of lessons from the TV show. It's like he's kind of forgotten some of those lessons. And this sort of happens with a lot of these characters, the relationship between Mal and Anara, it's regressed a bit from the show. And there's a way you can explain that away in universe by saying, well, time has passed and things got really rough between the end of the show and the start of the movie. But I do actually know, because I've watched the audio commentary, that Whedon deliberately did that so that everyone would have a bit more of an arc. But it does create a bit of an inconsistency when you look at the last time we saw these characters. Mal literally at the 2/3 point of this movie talks about shooting members of his beloved crew if they don't do what he wants, which is something that we would never see at the end of the TV show. Like, that is a regression of character so that he can come back to, so that he can have an arc for the movie itself. So, but again, it's not something I actually say is a bad thing. It's something I understand why they did it. But it is one of the many things which means that I think this actually probably works better as a movie. There's also some stuff, though, that gets sacrificed in the translation from show to film. One of them is two of these characters are married, right? And look, spoiler alert, but hey, we did the whole plot. Alan Tudyk's character of Hoburn Wash dies in the film. And I remember sitting in the cinema and for the first time watching this movie and watching, Gina Torres, who plays Zoe, mourn this character. And I was like, why is she so upset? And it's because I just totally missed the fact that they were married, because this film can't explain every single nuance. And maybe it did. Maybe there's a throwaway, hey, husband, or whatever, but it's not able to be given the airtime, if you like, in the movie alone to actually necessarily make that a really strong and powerful relationship, so that it pays off at the end. But of course, if you've seen the show, you already know they're married. You bring that into the movie with you. So there's a few things like that which do get a little bit lost in the film version.
That includes characters like Book. So yes. Book, the preacher, who is a much larger character in the show and is built up as a mystery, you don't get a payoff for Book other than you get to see him again in this movie. And he kind of guides Mal a little bit spiritually as far as his growth as a character, and explains to him basically what he's up against as far as the operative. Like, this is a man of total belief. Like, it's really hard to fight somebody like that. You don't get his payoff. I mean, I believe, and I haven't read them, that there is some character payoff in the subsequent comics for his character, because obviously there's this mysterious preacher who knows all these things about the Alliance and the darker side of the Alliance, and he never alludes to how he knows those things. But yeah, things have to be moved and things have to be sacrificed to tell a complete story in one film. And I don't begrudge any of it in this movie. It's I think the better version that could have been made and the sacrifices that were made were the correct ones, in my opinion. But I don't have another version to compare it against, I suppose. But I feel that it works so well that tampering with that would be weird.
I'm looking now at our runtime for this podcast, and I feel like we got trapped. Ben. we got trapped. We got trapped comparing the show and the movie, and we didn't do our due diligence and our duty, which is to talk about the movie.
Movie.
What do you think? Do you like it?
It's a great movie. It's a fun movie, and if you want to use it as just an introduction to sci-fi, an introduction to this world, or just a really fun Western sci-fi, I think it's a good time. It's got fantastic story. It's got fantastic tropes. It's got amazing characters and dialogue. And something we haven't spoken about yet is the action. There are some action sequences in this film and fights and things like that that are just entertaining to watch by themselves. This movie is a movie I come back to yearly. I had actually watched it this year already before this podcast. And I think it's great. Now, of course, I have rose-tinted glasses. I'm a fan of the property. But I genuinely think it's just a good, solid mid-tier sci-fi film. And you know what? We don't have a lot of them.
Yeah. It's also it's very, very ambitious for its budget point, and you can totally see a lot of the workflows and lessons from having to move fast on in TV land coming across to the film version. But again, I think that's a good thing. I was surprised actually on this rewatch because, like I said, it had been a little while for me. Um, Maybe, and when I say a little while, it'd probably been 18 months since I watched Serenity. But
That's a long time in Gymland.
it is, yeah. So, but I really liked the lighting, and that might seem like what the lighting, but I actually think the lighting is excellent in this film. Some of the exteriors, of course, are really, really flat and really, really bright, which goes with that Western aesthetic. But what I'm talking about when I say I like the lighting is a lot of the interiors, particularly in the ship, we really fall off into blackness around the characters, and it's got this great mood to it where we're just sort of, showing, maybe half their face, and then we don't have any fill, and it's this lovely, almost noirish kind of aesthetic sometimes that I had noticed before, but maybe not appreciated in the same way that I did on this rewatch. And there's a lot of really cool stuff going on.
This movie does space well.
Mm,
Like, on its budget, it does space really well, both interior and exterior, like interior of spaceships and the exterior. Space feels consequential. Like, it looks ominous, it looks vast, it looks deep and dark in moments. And then there are moments where, it breaks physics like all sci-fi movies, but the action and the movement of ships still feel kind of a little bit float and a little bit not tight as it should be in space. So yeah, you're right. Like the design and the lighting and the choices made for space in this movie are really cool.
I also think there's some really fun camera work in a way that there probably doesn't have any right to be when they were moving this fast. There's a couple of shots that come to mind when at the start of the movie during the heist, River is sensing that someone's going to give them a problem. The camera literally drifts off her face to the side and sort of snakes down. And I'm like, that's an unusual and very cool camera move that completely visually displays the thought that that character is psychic and is actually trying to pinpoint someone who's a problem for the characters in the heist. There's fun stuff like that. There's a lot of rotating camera when we get to action or moments of drama. And then, of course, they really committed to wide angle lenses, which they've used in very unusual and unique ways throughout the shoot. And that, of course, is, again, something present in the TV show as well. But it's a very cool look and it's a very cool aesthetic for this actual movie in terms of the way it's lit and the way it's shot, which I really appreciated. I like the action too. Like you said, I do like the action. Some of the action in terms of hand-to-hand combat is it has that thing about it whereby because it's highly choreographed, sometimes it's a little slow
Yes.
in terms of the actual execution of it in order to hit all of that sort of choreography. And when I say choreography, it's camera choreography as well as actors choreography, because the camera is moving and diving and getting in amongst it as well. And I think of course, if you have something like John Wick, you see that sort of thing as well, but they're able to do it faster because he trains for 2 years before they actually shoot the film. But of course, Serenity does have just, it's a little slow sometimes in those hand-to-hand moments in order to hit all of those beats. But you got to forgive him that for whatever it was, a 50-day shooting schedule and a 30 something $million budget, where it's like, we got to move fast and we don't have 2 years to train everybody. So it's kind of amazing when you look at the constraints, and that was really the only artifact, if you like, that we can see that maybe this was, could have gone a bit quicker.
Talking about the director, um, from his journey from TV to film, this is obviously a bit of a leap for him. And you can see his effort to create more storytelling outside of dialogue. Because in his TV career, his storytelling was all in the words and all in the characters themselves, right? That's what his shows are ultimately about. Even though it's a vampire slayer, it's more about a girl and her friends. And in this one, even though like there's this sci-fi background, it's more about this tight-knit crew. Whereas in this movie, obviously, he had the budget and he also had the necessity of, I have to tell story outside the dialogue. I have to tell story with action. I have to tell story with camera moves. I have to tell story with these other things to make it an additive experience. Otherwise, why make a movie at all? And I do, whether he had that in him all the time, but he was constrained by the format of TV, or he developed that or made this for this movie, I think it's an evolution and a jump in his style as well. And I think it's important to kind of point out, because he would come later on, whether people like it or not, to shape movie landscape a lot, with his future projects with Marvel and DC.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I think, of course, the last thing that we haven't talked about is the characters. And the characters are the heart and soul of this movie. Like I said, there's kind of too many of them for a
Yeah.
film, particularly one where we, are assumed to have not met them beforehand if you haven't watched the TV show. So it's a little unclear, what some people do on the ship. But again, they really went to great pains to make it as clear as possible. It's just the burden of that many characters. The joy, of course, is I love all the characters, and I think that they work well together, and the combinations of characters are fantastic, and there's a real natural ease to the cast, which comes from that television bonding experience that they had beforehand, to actually get us into this film and make us really root for these characters and enjoy being in their company. So I think, yeah, it's definitely got to give a moment to shout out the performances and character work, because it is the heart and soul of this movie.
I think the three characters that stand out, and it's because it's the way the script is written, is Summer Clough's River, Nathan Fillion's Mao, and then Duatella Giaffor's The Operative. Those three characters represent three different parts of the film, really. Like, Summer is, for lack of a better word, almost part MacGuffin.
Mm-hmm.
She is the crux of what this movie spins around. The operatives after her. She holds the secret to what the Alliance did. She holds the key to kind of Mal's redemption and revenge. Like, she is this kind of pivotal point of a character, and sometimes those characters can feel muddy. Sometimes those characters can feel one-dimensional. But I think the character of River, whether it's because I have past experience in the show or not, really kind of feels good. And that's because of what Whedon is best at. He's great, or was great, at creating those female characters with power and allowing them to be what they are. The character of Mal, and he's a war veteran on the losing side of a war. And that's where that darkness begins in this movie and comes from in this movie. And that's something else that gets a little bit lost in the film, even though it's mentioned as far as, his character profile by the operative. And then you've got the operative, who is just this kind of clean, driven, I know I'm doing what's best for the universe, even if I'm doing evil. And he obviously comes to kind of accept that maybe that isn't the case at his end, but he's such a cool, calm, collected, and efficient character. And he creates such really cool moments. especially when he's interrogating, or he's like, this is a good death, or I'll make this clean. He's not violent for violence sake. He's violent because that is part of what he thinks makes the universe a better place. And I just think those three characters deserve a really big shout out, because any one of those three characters doesn't work, this movie actually falls over.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think, yeah, as well, like the operative has some of the best lines in the whole movie, and they're always these cool, calm, collected lines where you just go, "Oh, that is a horrific sentiment," and yet he's delivering it with such,
Poise.
I guess, yeah, poise and calmness, and he understands what he is. He even says at one point, "I am a monster," and the world that I am creating, there is no place for me in it. So there's a lot of complexity there as well, which I really appreciated. And I love watching that performance, and I think it's fantastic. So
I also have one last thing I want to talk about. This movie may have the coolest movie poster of all time. Like, as far as marketing goes, it didn't make sense to market this film like a traditional Hollywood film, just because its audience was kind of built in. But that movie poster of her kind of holding the axes and "we aim to misbehave" is very cool.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome. So, and it's that poster which I remember. I didn't know anything about this movie, and that poster at the cinema on display as I went to see something else, I was like, that looks cool, and then that was enough to actually get me to get a ticket and go see it. I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. Something space, but there's an axe.
Space?
I like space. I like axes, So, but look, hopefully you enjoyed taking this trip on board Serenity with me. I certainly did, and I have such a fondness for this world. Of course, the first thing I wanted to do when I finished watching the movie was head back and watch the TV show once again, particularly because it had been a minute there. But I always love diving back into these characters in this world, and I think this is a great little gem. And it's a shame we never got the follow-ups to it. It's just it was obviously
what it is.
It just didn't take. So on terms of that big bold scale. But why don't you tell the people of the interwebs where they can find us, and then I'm very curious to hear what we're doing next.
Well, my fellow browncoats, if you want to listen to more of our movie propaganda, you can do it in many places. You can go to YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes. And to find us, you just have to type in Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. When you do find us, like, comment, subscribe. It really means a lot to us. We're almost at 50 subscribers. I know that's a weird thing to be proud of, but I'm really proud of that. The other thing is, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures on TikTok and Jim_and_Ben. Before we move on to my movie pick, I do want to point out we have reached a milestone this podcast. Do you know what that milestone is?
So we are at 1 year of doing this podcast as of this podcast.
52 podcasts, a podcast a week. That's we had a small gap at the start, but it's still 52 years worth. Oh, not 52 years.
52 years.
A year's worth of podcasts, which I'm really proud of. So thank you so much for taking this movie adventure with me, Jim, so far, and I can look forward to continuing it with you.
Nice. So where does it continue, Ben?
It continues to a bummer. This movie is confusing. This movie was marketed very incorrectly on its release, and a lot of children got very upset.
Oh, no.
We are going to watch a movie that still confuses me to this day because of its marketing, A Bridge to Terabithia.
That is not what I thought you were going to say. Oh, I'm going to cry.
Yeah, this movie is, warning, it is sad. There are some, to use the woke term, triggering moments in this film.
Yeah.
And it was marketed horrendously at its launch in a way that people didn't know what they were going to see. And if it comes from a book, so, I mean, some people knew. But yeah, I I saw a TikTok that reminded me of this movie this week, and I'm like, we have to watch it. So yeah, we're going to watch A Bridge to Terabithia.
Okay, I'm going to prepare for an emotional journey to Terabithia.
This may be the most emotional film we've watched.
Well, look, it depends what are your triggers.
Yeah.
This has several of mine, so we'll get into it if you like. But I always enjoy whatever the film is because we get to come together and chat about it. So I will see you next week. Until then, stay shiny, hey?
Bye, brown coats.